The bells rang out across King's Landing, their chimes echoing through streets strewn with rubble and the traces of a recent battle that had shocked the city to its core. High upon a black-scaled dragon perched Daenerys Targaryen, the breaker of chains, her silver-white hair plastered to her neck and brow by sweat and dust. She stared down at the city walls where her armies had breached the defenses. The sight of the Red Keep stood like a silent threat on the horizon, a promise of power and a symbol of her ancestral claim. Below her, many of the people had spilled out into the squares in panic. The bells, those dreaded bells, were tolling surrender, but her chest felt tight, her heart beating so violently she could almost taste its throbbing in her throat. She had been prepared to unleash fire and blood as she had done so many times before to those who resisted her birthright. She had watched her closest advisors betray her trust, watched the city she believed she had liberated prove more loyal to Cersei. She had felt a terrible anger building in her, an anger that threatened to turn into all-consuming fury. She recalled Rhaegal's body falling into the sea, the betrayal of Varys, the chilled expression on Sansa Stark's face whenever their eyes met. And above all, she remembered the moment Jon had revealed his true identity to her. Everything had been spiraling toward this moment, and the city lay at her mercy. They had rung the bells. Too little, too late, she had almost thought. She had wanted to punish their fear with a demonstration so terrible none would ever doubt her again. But then, she heard another sound beyond the bells. She heard the raw sobbing of the innocent in the streets, the children clinging to their mothers' skirts, the frantic pleas from those trying to find safety among the crumbling walls. She looked down, and amid the scorched squares and battered gates, she could see pockets of people with nothing, desperate only to live one more day. Some even reached trembling hands skyward, as if hoping for mercy from the Mother of Dragons. In that moment, Daenerys tasted something bitterer than anger, a realization that if she destroyed King's Landing in a rage, she would be no better than those tyrants she had toppled. The innocent. She had always fought for them, or at least she told herself as much. If she set them ablaze, she would lose everything that had once made her proud to be the breaker of chains. She closed her eyes, letting the great wings of Drogon buffet the air around her, sifting dust through the ruined streets. Her fingers curled around the reins, and she steadied her breath. The bells might have come too late, and perhaps those who had rung them did so only to save themselves. But she needed to remember who she was before the madness of vengeance consumed her. Long ago, she had imagined seating herself on the Iron Throne not through sheer carnage, but by winning the hearts of the people, freeing them from an endless cycle of oppression. She breathed in, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "Dracarys." But her voice faltered. Drogon hissed as if sensing her hesitation, turning his serpent-like neck to glance back at his rider. She kept her eyes on the distant spires of the Red Keep. She could see the Lannister banners still fluttering weakly in the wind. Yet, in her mind's eye, she saw so many others, tyrants from her past, whom she had triumphed over. Some she had crucified, some she had burned, and each time, she had convinced herself she was paving the road to a better world. If she burned a city of innocent people, her triumphant story would become a tragedy. Her jaw tightened with the force of her internal struggle. She set a steady hand on Drogon's scales, and as the next toll of the bells subsided, she drew a rattling breath. "No," she said, so softly it was lost in the swirl of air beneath Drogon's beating wings. "Not like this." Below, Grey Worm stood with the Unsullied, ready to carry out her command. His features were rigid, cast in stone, murder in his eyes for what had been done to Missandei, to Daenerys' children, her dragons. He was no longer the gentle soul she had come to know, the man who had dared to love. Now, he was vengeance incarnate, waiting for her to give the slightest sign. In his grip, the spear trembled with unspent rage. He glared up, meeting her eyes, awaiting the order. He must have seen the flicker of conflict in her face, for the tension in his posture wavered. Daenerys lifted a single hand, nearly trembling. She closed her eyes, searching through the layers of her grief, anger, betrayal. Then she signaled. Grey Worm, seeing the subtle shift, let his spear lower. No command to attack came. Instead, he heard only the bells, and with them, the silent acceptance that the city was surrendered, and their queen would show mercy. The Unsullied parted, letting those who had thrown down their arms live. The Dothraki riders, panting and restless, eyed their queen from the battered gates, uncertain how to proceed. Still astride Drogon, Daenerys guided him downward. He landed in a wide courtyard. Broken stone and shattered mortar scattered from the siege. The massive black wings folded as he settled, his clawed feet scraping the ground, the smell of ash heavy around them. Daenerys slid from his back, ignoring the burn in her limbs and the dryness in her throat. She was so exhausted that she could barely stand straight, though she held her chin high for the sake of her army. Grey Worm approached, breathing hard. There was confusion in his dark eyes, and behind him, some of the Unsullied looked uncertain too. Quiet reigned, save for the distant cry of civilians and the clang of dropped swords. This was the moment when her men realized she had chosen to spare the city rather than obliterate it. Some did not understand. Some had thirsted for the blood of those who had killed their brothers. She could sense their tension in the air, like a taut bowstring. But Daenerys lifted her voice, determined to show unwavering certainty in her choice, even if uncertainty and heartbreak raged inside her like a sea storm. "The city has surrendered," she declared in the common tongue, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "Secure the streets, let no one raise arms against us, but harm no innocents. The war is done." Grey Worm bowed his head, acknowledging her command. Even if vengeance burned inside him, he was bound to her will. "Yes, my queen," he said quietly, and then he turned, motioning for the Unsullied to move through the city and enforce peace. The tension in the air remained as the soldiers set about rounding up any Lannister forces still resisting in scattered pockets. The Dothraki, restless though they were, followed the Unsullied's example, though some muttered in their own language, uncertain why they were denied the sack. Daenerys stood still, a trembling wave of relief touching her shoulders. She did not know if she was strong or weak for sparing those who had scorned her, but she knew she could not let her rage swallow innocent lives. In her mind's eye, she could almost see Missandei looking at her with proud, gentle eyes. She turned then and saw Tyrion Lannister walking across the courtyard. His face was carved with lines of weariness, sorrow, and perhaps a morsel of respect for her decision. The pair locked eyes in the hush. Tyrion bowed, so slightly she almost missed it. "Your Grace," he said, his voice subdued. "You chose mercy." Her throat was dry, the words caught behind her teeth. "There has been enough death," was all she managed. She knew he had half expected her to raise the city, to prove herself the ruthless conqueror so many Targaryens before her had been. That she had not done so, she hoped, might show the realm who she truly was, or who she wished to be. Tyrion's gaze flitted to the still-burning pyres of broken siege weapons, and the scattered bodies of soldiers. Even a mercy had its share of bloodshed on this day. "Come," he said quietly, stepping aside. "We should see to the city. They will not trust easily after so much fear, but perhaps we can show them this new reign need not be forged in fire alone." Daenerys nodded, gathering herself, swallowing a dryness in her throat. "Where is Jon?" she asked. "I saw him with our forces. The Northmen were leading the push along the eastern walls." She felt an odd swirl of emotion at the mention of his name. She had broken away from him after they discovered the truth of his birth. She had felt betrayed, fearful that the realm would choose him instead of her. In a way, that fear still nestled in her heart, like a creeping shadow. Tyrion's expression softened. "He was assisting in the city's surrender. I believe he's trying to keep the Northerners from engaging in needless slaughter." She swallowed again, imagining the uneasy tension between Jon and the Northern forces, who still might hold Cersei's men in contempt. "We'll speak to him soon," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "We have a city to reorder." They walked together through the city's battered gates, flanked by the Unsullied and accompanied by Drogon's distant watchful presence overhead. As Daenerys passed knots of civilians, she could feel their raw fear. Many shrank away, trembling at the sight of the pale-haired queen who could command such a monstrous beast. Some whispered curses under their breath. Others looked at her with desperate hope. She tried not to let their haunted faces weigh her spirit down too much. She only marched forward, determined to show them that mercy was more than just a word. Small fires smoldered in the cracks of broken walls. The stench of smoke, dust, and the iron tang of blood hung heavy. Soldiers parted for her, and in the distance, she saw Jon Snow, hair matted with sweat, sword at his side, speaking to a group of northern soldiers who were rounding up Lannister men. Jon's posture was tense, but relief flickered in his eyes when he saw Daenerys approach with no sign of continuing the slaughter. He inclined his head in respect, though there was a cautiousness between them. "Your Grace," he greeted, voice hoarse from shouting commands. Behind him, half a dozen men in stark livery stood, awaiting further orders. She stood there for a moment, meeting his eyes. How once she had felt so warm in his presence, that fierce combination of tenderness and loyalty. Now, there was a barrier between them that neither seemed certain how to breach. Yet there was a faint hope inside her that it was not lost entirely. She nodded. "It is done," she told him. "The city is ours. The war is over." He gazed around at the shattered blocks. "Let's hope the innocent will not suffer further. We should see that they have water, food, whatever they need to survive. Many are wounded. Some are trapped beneath collapsed structures." "Nain." She glanced at Tyrion, who inclined his head in agreement. "I'll see that we organize a relief effort," the dwarf said. "Though we will need to establish order quickly. Perhaps I can call upon some old acquaintances in the city who might be persuaded to help if they believe in our cause." Daenerys listened, her mind swimming with the immediate tasks. She had come here to claim the throne, and yet she found herself standing in a city only half intact, filled with terrified people. To rule as queen was more than claiming the seat. It was tending to the realm, seeing to the wounds she and her enemies had caused. "Do it," she told Tyrion at last, giving him a measured look. "And see if you can round up any of Cersei's guards that remain. I want them to stand down. Let none roam freely to cause chaos." Tyrion bowed and departed. That left Daenerys with Jon, the hush between them almost excruciating. Drogon swept overhead, a black silhouette crossing the smoky sky. Finally, Jon spoke, voice low. "We did what we came to do. I only pray we can bring some measure of peace to these people." He paused, studying her. The lines of exhaustion on his face matched her own. "I feared, after everything. I thought you might." He broke off, uncertain how to phrase it. She swallowed. "I came close," she admitted. "Too close. But I can't be the queen I promised I would be if I burn them all. I can't punish a city for my losses." There was gratitude in his eyes, maybe even admiration. "Mercy is never a weakness," he said quietly, and she wondered if he knew how deep her internal battle had been. They lingered in that battered street for a long moment, neither sure what to say next. She could almost feel the weight of the past weeks pressing on them. Missandei's death, Rhaegal's death, Varys' betrayal, the revelation of Jon's parentage. All were coiled into a knot that would not untangle with mere words. But at least for now, they were not on opposite sides of that gulf. They had found a fragile step toward each other by choosing mercy. Across the city, the clang of swords dimmed, replaced by the shuffle of scuffed boots and the distant wailing of the injured. Daenerys moved with Jon as they began to assess the damage, entering narrow alleys where the dust still hung thick in the air. They passed groups of northern soldiers distributing water and blankets under the watchful eyes of the Unsullied. They passed women and children, some of whom retreated into doorways, while others reached out pleadingly for help. Jon stooped to aid one older man whose arm hung limp, speaking gently to him as Daenerys watched. Every so often, one of the citizens would look at Daenerys with eyes full of distrust or relief, or a swirling mixture of both. She tried not to let her uncertainty show. If she could hold back the storm of her anger once, perhaps she could learn to harness the love of these people, given time. Yet the fears lingered. She had heard them speak. Some believed she was the rightful queen. Others whispered that she was another Targaryen tyrant, ready to exact her wrath at the slightest provocation. All she could do was keep walking, speaking quietly to those who dared approach her, instructing her men to deliver bread and water whenever possible. Dusk set upon King's Landing in a slow, somber fade. Fires still smoldered in parts of the city, casting an orange glow across the rubble. Exhausted, Daenerys found herself drifting into the Red Keep's outer courtyard, where some of her soldiers had set up temporary living quarters. She was greeted by the presence of Tyrion once more, who had been bustling between various tasks. With him was Ser Davos, who had offered his counsel in these chaotic times, and who seemed quietly relieved that Daenerys had not taken her rage out on the city. They spoke in hushed tones about the next steps. Tyrion suggested establishing a base of operations in the throne room, though the structure around it had partially collapsed. The Iron Throne, ironically, might still be intact. Daenerys felt an odd pang at the thought of claiming that seat of swords in a crumbled hall. But it was symbolic that she had taken the city, even if in a far gentler manner than she once intended. Ser Davos cleared his throat. "We'll need a day or two, Your Grace, to properly see to the wounded, feed the hungry. We'll need to restore fresh water supplies. The city's in a sorry state, but the sooner we begin, the sooner these people might start believing in your reign. And we also must consider how to handle the Lannisters who surrendered. Some are loyal to the cause, some might try to sow discontent." Daenerys nodded, rubbing her brow. She had not slept in what felt like days, but she had to remain vigilant. She looked to Tyrion. "Have them brought before me. I'll speak to their highest-ranking officers. We can arrange terms of transition. Anyone who resists will be imprisoned until we decide their fate." "Now then," Tyrion splayed his hands, "you will have no shortage of men to question." He hesitated, weighing his words. "Cersei herself. We still haven't found her body." Daenerys froze. She had assumed, in the destruction near the Red Keep, that Cersei Lannister was either crushed under the rubble or had fled in some impossible last gambit. The city had surrendered, but the uncertainty of Cersei's fate lingered like a rotted stench. If the lioness still lived, she might plot from the shadows, or perhaps she was cowering somewhere, waiting for an opportune moment. "Keep searching," Daenerys said, voice hardening. "If you find her alive—" She stopped herself, a wave of bitterness swelling. She remembered Missandei's last word, Drakari, vengeance. She forced her bitterness down. "If you find her, she will stand trial." Tyrion bowed his head. "As you say, Your Grace." He gestured wearily to the walkway that led inside the Red Keep. "You should rest if you can. We have much to do in the coming days." Daenerys felt the weight behind her eyes, the pull of exhaustion in her limbs. Part of her wanted to remain vigilant all night, though her body screamed for rest. "I will," she said, "but first, I need a moment to myself." She glanced at Jon, who was standing quietly, listening. She considered whether to ask him to join her, unsure if he even wanted to. Jon stepped forward, reading something in her expression. "We can speak," he offered gently. "If you wish it." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Let's speak." They found a quiet corridor in the Red Keep that had mostly survived the siege, though the walls bore cracks and the floors were littered with debris. A single torch flickered against the stone, the corridor otherwise drowned in shadow. Outside, the swirl of voices and the shuffle of boots echoed as the soldiers set up a semblance of camp. Daenerys felt the day's weight pressing on her shoulders more acutely in the silence. She turned to Jon, her back against a pillar, arms crossed as if to shield herself from the vulnerability in her chest. He stepped closer, carefully. "I wanted to tell you, I'm proud of what you did today. You spared so many." His voice was hushed, but earnest. She closed her eyes, feeling a tremor pass through her. "It wasn't easy," she whispered. "I wanted to strike back. I still feel that rage sometimes, burning like a dragon's breath in my blood." She forced her eyes open to look at him. "I lost so much. And after everything you told me, you were Aegon Targaryen. I still remember how I felt, like the ground had fallen out from beneath me, that my destiny, my birthright, was being threatened." Jon seemed pained by her words. "I never wanted that. You know I don't want the throne. I've said so many times. I swear I told my sisters to keep your secret, but trust is a difficult thing for them. They have reason to mistrust Targaryens. She sighed, pressing her lips together. I know. But Sansa's distrust, Varys' betrayal. It all spiraled so fast. I was terrified that the people would see you as the rightful ruler over me. And once fear took hold of me, I felt alone. She studied his face in the torchlight. I'm sorry, Jon. He blinked in surprise. You've nothing to be sorry for. She raised a hand, cutting him off gently. I've been harsh. You are not to blame for who your father was. You're not to blame for telling the truth. I have been afraid. I only want to build a better world, and every day it feels like that world is slipping from my grasp. Jon's brow furrowed with empathy. It's not slipping away. Look at what you did today. You said you would build a better world, and instead of burning these people, you spared them. He paused, his eyes searching hers. You're strong, Daenerys. Strong enough to do what's right, even when it hurts. Nebeper. She felt tears burn in the corners of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. The day had been too long, too blood-soaked, for tears. She drew a shaking breath. I want them to accept me as their queen, Jon. But I know many fear me or resent me, and perhaps they'd rather have you. She set her jaw, steadying her resolve. But the realm needs unity. I can't rule by fear. I want. She paused, and the flickering torch revealed the introspection in her features. If I'm to earn their trust, I have to show them that I have faith in you too. He frowned slightly, unsure what she meant, but she continued. I've thought about it since you told me your name, Aegon Targaryen. I hated it at first, but I can't deny it's the truth, nor can I deny what it means. There's more at stake than just my claim. She exhaled, letting some of her tension drain. If you truly don't want the throne, perhaps you'd consent to be named my heir. Jon's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Your heir? She nodded, forcing herself to speak her thoughts aloud, though it made her heart pound. Yes. If I can't have children, if I were to die. She trailed off, that grim possibility lodging in her throat. The realm would need stability. And who better to inherit my claim than you? The only other living Targaryen. That alone would show the realm I do not fear your blood. It would be a gesture of trust to the north, and to everyone who wonders if I might become the mad queen they whisper about. If I was threatened by you, why would I name you heir? Jon took an unsteady breath. I don't know if that's right. I've never wanted a crown. I've seen what kingship does to good men. She stepped toward him, her eyes unwavering. I have no intention of dying soon, she said, a wry attempt at levity touching her voice. But the realm must know what comes after me. If I name no heir, they'll tear each other apart once I'm gone, or sooner. I'll not let a question of succession cause war after war. He swallowed hard, glancing away as if searching the corridor for a reason to evade. You know it will stir the lords in the north. They may rally to me, thinking it's a sign I should be king now. Nay, no. She set a hand gently on his arm, the sensation electric between them after so long. I will quell that. I will make it clear you are to be my heir, not to replace me unless I cannot rule. She managed a thin smile. And if you truly hate the idea, I suppose you could abdicate the moment it passes to you. But I ask you this, not for me alone, but for the good of the 7 kingdoms. Jon closed his eyes for a long time, wrestling with the tides of duty that always seemed to pull him in different directions. At last, he nodded, a subtle dip of his chin. If it brings peace, if it shows people you're not threatened by me, if it means fewer wars, I'll do it. But I won't be a rival to you, Dany, I promise that. She almost laughed at the earnestness with which he said it. I believe you. She took another step closer, and in the quiet hush of that corridor, she gazed into his eyes, searching for the warmth she once felt. For a moment, she wanted to bridge the gap between them, to hold him close, and wash away the weeks of hurt and distrust. But the scars ran too deep to simply vanish overnight. Instead, she only gave his arm a small squeeze. Thank you, Jon. He gave a small nod in return, and in that gesture, she felt an unspoken bond reaffirm itself. It was fragile, yes, but it was there. The next morning broke with a sun that struggled to pierce the haze of smoke lingering over King's Landing. Daenerys woke in a modest chamber within the Red Keep, the grander apartments damaged or unsafe. The stones were cold beneath her bare feet as she stepped out to the narrow balcony. From there, she could see a portion of the city, the bricks blackened, towers half collapsed, but the streets beginning to stir with life. People who had hidden themselves away in the night were emerging, testing the air, checking to see if it was safe. She spotted columns of unsullied patrolling, and the occasional swirl of Dothraki riders, though they were quieter than usual. She spent the morning in council. Tyrion had assembled various figures of import: Sir Davos, Grey Worm, a handful of captured Lannister officers who had surrendered, and Jon Snow stood at her side as well. They gathered in the great hall that was partly caved in, but the throne itself had survived. Its silhouette loomed in the background like a dark statue. The hall was strewn with dust and debris. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, forming columns of light that illuminated swirling moats. The Lannister officers stood in a tense row. Their armor was scorched, their cloaks caked with grime. They looked wary, beaten, many bowing their heads rather than meet the new queen's gaze. Daenerys regarded them for a silent moment, letting the hush stretch. Then she spoke in a firm, clear voice. "You fought for Cersei Lannister," she said, her accent carrying her words distinctly. "You fought because you believed you were loyal to the rightful queen, or because you had no choice. Now you have a choice. Swear your loyalty to me, Daenerys of House Targaryen, rightful queen of the Andals and the First Men, or lay down your titles and walk away from any place in this city's governance. If you will not live under my rule, you are free to depart, provided you lay down your arms for good." Nawin. One of the officers, an older man with grime smeared across his brow, stepped forward, kneeling heavily on one knee. He did not look up. "Your Grace," he said, voice trembling, "we are yours. We want only to protect our families, our city." Others followed, kneeling beside him. There was no trace of defiance. Perhaps if the city had not felt the terror of dragonfire so close at hand, they would have challenged her. But now, they offered themselves to her will. Daenerys glanced at Tyrion, who nodded. "Then we have an understanding," she said. "Work alongside my hand, Tyrion Lannister, to bring stability back to these streets. Anyone who wishes to leave may do so unmolested. Anyone who takes up arms against me will find no mercy." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Now go." The men bowed and filed out. Soon the hall was quiet again, aside from the restless shuffling of unsullied guards. Daenerys rubbed her temples, feeling the strain of these official duties. Grey Worm took a step forward. "Is there more you wish of me, my queen?" She considered, then looked around at those assembled. "We have to root out any outlaws taking advantage of the chaos. Grey Worm, instruct the Unsullied to patrol the markets and the poorer quarters. Offer protection and quell any looting or violence. Also, gather any weapons the Lannister soldiers left behind and store them in the armory. I don't want them falling into the wrong hands." Grey Worm bowed sharply. "It will be done." As he left, Tyrion and Davos discussed measures to bring food from outside the city. The city's granaries were dangerously low, and the blockade leading up to the siege had already caused hunger in the poorer district. Jon stepped in, offering to lead some of the northern forces to arrange farmland supervision, ensuring the harvest would not be disrupted by bandits. While they spoke of logistics, Daenerys' gaze drifted to the Iron Throne. She recalled her earliest dreams of claiming it, back when she was just a frightened girl with a violent brother. Standing close to it now, she felt a pang in her chest. Even though she had taken the city, it did not feel like the triumphant moment she once imagined. She had not marched in to cheering crowds. She had come to the foot of the throne after a bloody war in a battered city. Perhaps that was how all conquests felt in the end, hollow and fraught with a new list of responsibilities. She stepped away from the group, her eyes fixed on the twisted swords. With each step, her boots kicked up small clouds of dust. She came to a stop before the dais, remembering the stories of her father seated there, the Mad King, yelling for his pyromancers to burn them all. She remembered stories of her ancestor Aegon, forging the kingdom through dragonfire. She remembered all the reasons she had for believing she would be different. Mercy, or compassion. She wondered if the throne would accept that from her, or if it demanded the old ways of fire and blood. Her hand lifted, brushing against the iron armrest. It was sharp and cold beneath her fingertips. She did not sit. She only looked at it, a knot tightening in her throat. At length, she drew her hand away and turned back to face Jon, Tyrion, and Sir Davos. A quiet hush fell over them as they registered her expression. It was said that the throne was forged in dragonfire, she said softly, her gaze sweeping the hall. That whoever sits on it wields the power of the 7 kingdoms. But power is fleeting. It slips through your fingers like sand unless you hold it tight. She paused, eyes settling on Jon. I want a different legacy. We've had enough tyrants. I will not be remembered as another. No. Tyrion nodded, understanding the significance of her words. Davos stroked his beard, thoughtful. Jon looked resolute. They might have pressed her further, but she turned her attention back to the pressing matters of the day. Though she felt the pull of the throne behind her like a lodestone, she would not let it define her. Not yet. The realm came first. Throughout the following days, Daenerys made daily circuits through the streets, accompanied by Unsullied and occasionally joined by Jon or Tyrion. Grey Worm ensured that order was kept. The Dothraki found themselves confined to certain quarters at times, their ferocity ill-suited to guard duty. But their presence was enough to deter petty criminals. Slowly, the city began to limp toward a semblance of normalcy. Bakers reopened their shops if they had flour, street vendors tried to ply what little wares they had, and survivors salvaged what they could from the wreckage of their homes. An air of unease hovered around Daenerys wherever she went. People remained wary of the queen who had conquered them. But in small, precious moments, she saw glimpses of gratitude. A mother who clutched her child and thanked Daenerys for sparing their lives. A crippled beggar who was given bread and water by one of her soldiers. A few small folk who knelt, not in terror, but in genuine respect. She held onto those moments, letting them temper the heartbreak of the war. The question of her succession hovered in the back of her mind. She had spoken with Jon, and he had agreed to be named her heir, but she had not yet proclaimed it to anyone else. To do so would be a public act, with great consequence. She pondered how best to present it to the lords and ladies of Westeros, assuming they rallied to the city to pay homage. She could wait until her coronation, but the city was in no condition for lavish ceremonies. Perhaps once the city had stabilized, she would call a gathering, so that none could doubt her generosity and none could suspect her of wanting to overshadow Jon's claim. It would be a delicate balance, one that weighed on her more each day. Late one evening, Daenerys returned to the Red Keep, exhausted from hours spent coordinating relief efforts. She found Jon near a window in one of the sturdier corridors, gazing out at the city. Golden torchlight made his dark hair gleam, and she noted the taut lines of concern in his expression. She moved to join him, leaning on the windowsill. The sky was a velvet purple, with a handful of scattered stars. The haze of lingering smoke caught the glow of the moon. She could see a few torches burning in the streets, but the city was calmer at night now, no longer filled with shrieks and panic. "How do you think the North will take it?" she asked softly, not bothering with preamble. "That I've claimed the throne in this manner?" Jon glanced at her, his gaze steady. "Some will be angry. Some won't care at all, as long as their families are safe. And some will remain wary of a Targaryen queen, no matter what. But your actions in sparing the city will reach Winterfell soon enough. It may help. They'll see you're not a bloodthirsty tyrant." She nodded slowly, letting that sink in. "And when they hear I plan to name you as heir, they might read it as me trying to chain you to my side. Or they might see it as a gesture of trust." Jon turned fully toward her. "I'll make them see it as trust. It's the truth, isn't it?" He offered a tentative half-smile. "If Sansa or Arya or any of them question it, I'll answer for you." A flicker of relief coursed through her. She realized she was grateful for his support, more than she could easily express in words. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded, and a comfortable quiet descended upon them. She gazed out again. Somewhere out there, Grey Worm led the patrols. Tyrion likely huddled over parchments detailing supply lines. Davos might be doling out what meager rations they had left. And somewhere, there were thousands of people trying to scrape a life back together in the ashes of a broken capital. She did not regret sparing them, no matter how her anger had clamored for retribution. Perhaps it was the one act that might save her soul. Jon's voice came again, lower this time. We'll rebuild Dany. It'll take time and it'll be hard, but we'll do it. And maybe one day they'll cheer you as they once cheered Robert after he took the throne. Only without the lies and the cruelty that followed. She let out a soft laugh. I don't need cheers. I just need to keep them safe. They stood there a while longer, side by side, letting the hush of the night swirl around them, a reminder that peace, however fragile, had settled for now. The following weeks were filled with back-breaking work, and 1,000 decisions that had to be made. Daenerys spared no effort, her presence a constant among the people, ensuring they saw her face not just as a war victor, but as someone who strove to help them. The small folk began to whisper that perhaps the Dragon Queen was not as cruel as they had feared. Rumors spread that she had turned from vengeance at the final hour to spare them, that she had even provided bread from her own stores. Some still eyed her with suspicion. Memories of dragonfire scorching the city walls fresh in their minds. But little by little, a fragile acceptance grew. Tyrion, ever the skilled hand, organized trade routes, sending ravens to friendly lords for supplies to feed the capital. He bristled at times under the confusion of no longer being sure which lords were friend or foe. But Daenerys observed him carefully. He seemed more earnest in his duties than he had been in Meereen, determined to uphold the trust she had placed in him despite his past mistakes. She appreciated his efforts, though she kept her caution around him, keenly aware that too many close to her had turned. Grey Worm and the Unsullied maintained a strict peace. They were unyielding to any criminals, but Daenerys insisted that petty thieves, many of whom were stealing only to survive, be shown lenience with forced labor rather than execution, a stance that earned her a grudging measure of respect among the small folk. The Dothraki chafed under the order and quiet, but she assigned some of them to patrolling the roads leading into the city, ensuring that brigands did not disrupt incoming supply wagons. That gave them a taste of the open field and kept their restlessness in check. Jon's role became both a commander of the northern forces in the city and a bridge between Daenerys and her new subjects. Many who were too frightened or proud to approach the Dragon Queen found that speaking with the king in the north, though he disclaimed that title, was easier. He listened, he offered them reassurances, and he reported back to Daenerys. Together, they handled countless pleas for help or requests for resources. In all of this, Daenerys felt an unspoken closeness growing between her and Jon again. Though it was different than before. Where once there had been passionate embraces and whispered vows, now there was a partnership tempered by sorrow and caution. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and she felt that old spark. But neither seemed eager to rush back into the intensity of their romance. They carried too much baggage. And yet, side by side, they functioned with a unity that served the realm. At last, as the city settled into this uneasy peace, Daenerys decided it was time to address the matter of succession publicly. She called a gathering in the Great Hall of the Red Keep, inviting lords who had arrived from various corners of Westeros. Not all had come, but enough that word would spread quickly once the news was pronounced. She had Tyrion, Davos, and Jon with her at the front, and Grey Worm stood guard with a battalion of Unsullied to ensure no chaos erupted. The lords and ladies in attendance were a weary lot. Many had arrived to see what the new queen would do with King's Landing. Many had come seeking her favor, some grudgingly. But all were curious about the shape her rule would take. Standing before them, Daenerys let her gaze sweep across the assembled crowd. She saw men in ragged cloaks, battered from the war, and women who wore resentment in their eyes for the downfall of House Lannister. She also saw flickers of hope, of curiosity. She lifted her head high, her voice echoing in the vaulted hall. "You have come to see the new ruler of Westeros," she began. "I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, breaker of chains, breaker of the siege upon King's Landing. You know who I am and what I've done. You know I have claimed the city not for destruction, but to free you from Cersei Lannister's tyranny. Some of you welcomed me as a savior. Others feared I would be your doom." She paused, letting her words resonate. "I have made mistakes, but I have chosen mercy for this city and its people. And I promise you, as your queen, I will continue to guide the realm away from tyrants' cruelty." House. A faint stir moved among the gathered. Some faces remained guarded, others softened. Daenerys inhaled softly. "But I know that fear lingers. I know that some doubt my claim, especially after hearing who Jon Snow truly is." She gestured slightly toward Jon, who stood to her left, tension in his posture. "Heir is Aegon Targaryen, true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen. By blood and birth, he also has a claim to the Iron Throne." She let the murmur roll through the crowd before lifting a hand to silence them. "But he does not seek it, nor do I see him as a threat. Instead, I name him as my heir, the Prince of Dragonstone." The murmur rose to a buzz. Many in the crowd exchanged astonished looks, some with a flash of alarm or confusion. Among them, a handful of northern lords furrowed their brows, uncertain if this made Jon their king or something else. Daenerys let the reaction flow, then continued. "I will rule as your queen. Should I fall in defense of the realm, if the stranger takes me before my time, then let it be known that Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, shall inherit the crown. He is a man of honor, who has proven himself a defender of the living time and again, from Winterfell to the walls of this city." Mindshad. She paused, letting her eyes meet Jon's briefly, a current of shared resolve passing between them. Then she lifted her chin. "With this, I show you all that I do not fear the truth of his birth. I do not fear your whispers that he might be the better choice. He is my kin and my ally, and I trust him with the future of the realm. I will not lead by fear. I will lead by faith, unity, and justice." At that, the hall erupted into a flurry of hushed conversation. Daenerys steeled herself, waiting for the wave of talk to crest. Tyrion stepped forward, raising his voice to call for order, reminding the assembly of the queen's presence. Jon stood resolute, though Daenerys could sense the weight he carried, knowing he did not covet the power bestowed upon him. Some lords and ladies knelt, unsure but willing to show deference. Others remained standing, calculating expressions on their faces, clearly anticipating how this might shift the dynamics of power in Westeros. A few northern lords glanced at each other, uncertain if this meant they could push for northern independence. But Sir Davos, standing near them, calmly advised them to hold their tongues and see how this new arrangement fared. Daenerys offered a final promise. "I will do all in my power to restore what has been lost, to rebuild the city, to bring prosperity back to the Seven Kingdoms. I ask for your fealty, and in return, I pledge mine to the realm, to protect it from all who would do it harm. Let us move forward together, not as conqueror and conquered, but as one people." With that, the gathering concluded. Daenerys stepped away from the dais, tension leaking from her shoulders as she retreated to a side corridor. Jon soon joined her, and though the hall behind them was still abuzz with chatter, in that quiet alcove, it was only the two of them again. He let out a breath, running a hand through his dark hair. "You've set the course now," he said. "They'll talk of this for years to come." Daenerys exhaled in a trembling sigh. "No more secrets, no more fear. You are my heir." She tried for a faint smile. "Let them talk. Let them see that I have no intention of destroying the realm in order to rule it." Jon placed a hand on her shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like ages, it felt natural. "You made the right choice, and so did I." She gazed at him, the swirl of relief and lingering sorrow filling her eyes. "Perhaps we did," she whispered. "Perhaps this is how we begin to heal." Then they fell silent, letting the weight of the day sink in, uncertain of what the future would bring, but for once, hoping it might be brighter than the past. They stood in the corridor listening to the echoes of voices trickling from the great hall, as if the very stones were still abuzz with speculation. Daenerys felt the rush of the moment slowly ebbing away, replaced by an almost surreal calm. It was done. She had named Jon her heir. A step once inconceivable had been announced to the gathered lords of Westeros. Already she could feel the currents of unease, hope, and uncertainty moving through the Red Keep like subterranean rivers. Yet in the hush of that alcove, it was simply the two of them, Daemon Targaryen and Rhaenys, or Aegon and Rhaenys, she imagined, once in ages past, except not quite. Jon exhaled, gazing at the floor. His hand had slipped from her shoulder, and he let it hang by his side. Unspoken questions on his lips. "The realm will talk," he said at last, echoing the same sentiment he had expressed in the Great Hall. "They might even doubt your sincerity. Wonder if you only name me heir because I could become a threat." "They will wonder many things," Daenerys replied softly. "But let them. You, Tyrion, Davos, you'll help me prove I mean what I say. If I were threatened by your existence, I would not have welcomed it so publicly." She managed a small smile that didn't quite disguise her underlying tension. "And you've not given me cause to fear you, though once I did." "You feared me?" His brow furrowed as if the notion remained difficult to accept. She lifted a shoulder in a faint shrug. "I feared losing what I believed was mine. Losing you." Her words almost tripped over themselves. "I was so alone when I came here. I lost my advisors, my closest friends. I lost 2 of my children." She grimaced at the painful memory of Rhaegal's body crashing into the cold sea. "Every time I stretched out a hand for help, I felt it slipping from my grasp." He nodded, absorbing the honesty. "If it's any comfort, I've been alone too, just in different ways." His voice was quiet, but no less grave. "We'll both do our best from now on. You have my word." "Maiden?" They exchanged a look that spoke of unspoken pain and an edge of promise. Then together, they headed back into the corridors, aware that the day was not over simply because the grand announcement had ended. The Red Keep was brimming with lords and emissaries, and soon many would request audiences to discuss fresh alliances or to petition for relief for their home regions. Daenerys suppressed a weary sigh and lifted her chin, resolving to appear calm and regal in front of them, though every muscle in her body still carried the tension of the war's aftermath. The first to approach her was a thin man in fine robes bearing the sigil of House Rosby, accompanied by a pair of equally thin attendants. He wore the nervous expression of someone uncertain whether to bow deeply or simply dip his head. Daenerys inclined hers in acknowledgement, letting him decide. He ended up bowing, deep enough that his hair nearly brushed the dusty floor. "My queen," he ventured, a tremor in his voice. "I am Lord Porton Rosby. I have come to beg your assistance for the outlying fields near Rosby. The war, it has disrupted our harvest. My men are few. We can't protect our farms from roving outlaws and pardon from your own men who pass through at times. We beg that you help us restore order so our small folk can plant and harvest without fear." Daenerys glanced at Jon. He offered a subtle nod, silently confirming that such troubles were indeed likely, given the breakdown of authority after Cersei's fall. Daenerys straightened and addressed the Lord. "You shall have what aid we can spare. I will appoint riders, both Dothraki and Northern, under Sir Davos' guidance, to patrol the roads around Rosby and your fields. In return, your people will continue to supply King's Landing with grain once the harvest is done. We are all in dire need of food." None. Relief flooded Lord Rosby's features, and he bowed again, so effusively that his gaunt figure nearly wobbled. "Thank you, my queen. Thank you. I will ensure your generosity is repaid." He sidled off, murmuring his gratitude. Daenerys could already feel the tug of responsibilities stacking up, each new request or petition a reminder of the realm's fragility. She caught Jon's eye, but before they could speak, another figure stepped forward. This one was a woman with proud cheekbones and hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a wine-colored gown. Daenerys recognized the golden ringlets embroidered on the woman's sleeves, the sigil of House Redwine. The lady introduced herself as Lady Marith Redwine, a cousin to the main family in the Arbor. "My queen," Lady Marith said, dipping into a graceful curtsy. Our vineyards have survived the war relatively unscathed. We have a surplus of arbor gold. We are willing to sell at a reasonable price if your city is in need of goods to stabilize the population. Daenerys tilted her head, measuring the woman's tone. Wine might not be the top priority for the hungry, my lady. Lady Meredith's mouth tightened, and she inclined her head. Of course, we understand. But as I'm sure your advisors will tell you, wine can be a source of revenue, and coin can fund a great many necessities. My house has always traded with the crown, so I offer you first right to purchase from our stock. We can arrange shipping if the seas are safe. Now, Daenerys could sense Tyrion's interest flickering from across the hall. She summoned him with a glance, and he ambled over, listening to Lady Meredith's pitch. Tyrion cleared his throat. Wine does indeed generate revenue, and the Arbor's vintages are well known throughout the Seven Kingdoms. If we can secure an agreement that a portion of the profits goes to relief for the city's poorest, we might find ourselves in a beneficial arrangement. Wine. Daenerys saw Lady Meredith's expression brighten subtly, though the woman attempted to maintain her composure. She likely hoped for a handsome profit, but any partnership with the new queen would cement House Redwine's position in the shifting political landscape. The intricacies of Westerosi trade were not Daenerys' strength, so she nodded to Tyrion. You have my leave to negotiate the particulars. Ensure that any arrangement benefits my people, not just merchants. Lady Meredith lowered her eyes, curtsying again, and Daenerys felt a hint of satisfaction that the older families of Westeros were slowly coming to treat her with the respect usually reserved for one of their own. Whether it was fear or genuine respect, time would tell. With each passing hour, more supplicants approached. Lesser lords, knights seeking pardon for supporting the Lannisters, merchants eager to secure favorable trade rights, and a handful of refugees from the Crownlands who had come to beg the queen for protection or a meager share of food. Daenerys' heart ached at the sight of the latter group, children in rags, mothers with sunken eyes. She delegated her soldiers to direct them to the relief centers, set up in the city squares, where bread and water were distributed daily. The stock was meager, but it was better than nothing. By the time twilight approached, Daenerys felt as though she had been in a never-ending swirl of demands, pleas and politicking. Her stomach growled, her head throbbed, yet she pushed through. Jon, too, began to show signs of fatigue, but he stayed by her side, quietly offering commentary or stepping in to calm a particularly anxious petitioner. In subtle ways, it reminded her of how they'd once fought side by side, forging an alliance at Dragonstone before the threat of the dead had demanded they journey north. Despite everything that had come between them, they still worked well together. At last, Tyrion intervened, suggesting that the queen had taken enough audiences for one day, and that any remaining could wait until the morning. The last man in line, an emissary from an obscure minor house, looked disappointed, but even he could see that the queen was ready to collapse. Daenerys stood from the bench she'd occupied, ignoring the cramp in her back, and nodded to her hand. A short while later, she and Jon found themselves in a small chamber, once used by lesser courtiers. The high windows let in the faint glow of a moonlit sky, and an assortment of candles flickered on a battered wooden table. Grey Worm had stationed two unsullied outside the door, but otherwise they had privacy. Daenerys peeled off her gloves, flexing her stiff fingers. I never realized how exhausting it would be to hold court in a realm that's half broken, she said, half to herself. Jon, who had settled onto a bench, nodded. 1,000 needs, and only so many hands to meet them. That's always been the trouble of governance. He offered a tired smile. We'll have to pace ourselves. She made a soft sound of agreement and collapsed into the chair opposite him. The table between them bore a half-eaten loaf of bread, some cheese, and a pitcher of watered wine, remnants of a hasty meal Tyrion had arranged earlier in the day. Daenerys reached for the bread, tearing off a piece and chewing. She grimaced at how stale it had become sitting out, but she was too hungry to be particular. Jon took a smaller piece and ate in silence. Outside, the faint glimmer of torchlight flickered against the stone walls. Daenerys gazed at Jon, noticing how his shoulders slumped from the day's burden. She felt the lingering ache in her own bones. Yet in the midst of that weariness, she recalled how not so long ago, she'd been enthralled by the mystery of him. The king in the north who refused to bend the knee until they found common cause in the fight against the Night King. Now here they were, the war behind them, though at such cost. And each day they discovered new tasks, new trials. Peace was not as simple as the lull after victory. After a few minutes of respite, she ventured to speak. "Do you think the lords will accept it as easily as they pretended to today?" Some were kneeling, but I saw doubt in their eyes. Jon considered the question. "They'll test you, and they'll test me. Naming me your heir might soothe some who feel your claim is uncertain, but it'll stir others. Some might wonder if the moment you show weakness, they can push me to take the throne." He paused, brow furrowing. "I won't let that happen. I said I'd support you, and I meant it." She studied him across the table, the flickering candle casting half his face in shadow. "I believe you," she said softly. "I want them to see we stand together. If they attempt to drive a wedge between us, they should find only a wall." He offered a small, weary smile. "We'll make sure of it." They lapsed into another silence that felt more comfortable than many of the conversations they'd had these past weeks. Daenerys sipped her watered wine, gazing at the curtained window. The city lay out there, full of trouble and desperation, but also full of the faint sparks of hope she was determined to kindle. She remembered the twisted wreckage of Meereen when she first set about freeing the slaves, the chaos that followed. She had persevered then, guided by the desire to help the powerless. Now, she had a new city, a new realm to heal. She glanced at Jon, whose gaze was distant, as though lost in memory. "Where does your mind wander, Jon Snow?" she asked in a gentle tone. He took a moment to respond. "I was thinking about the north, about Winterfell. Wondering what Sansa and Arya will think when they hear what happened. Wondering if they'll ever trust you as I do." He sighed. "And part of me wonders if I'll ever see Winterfell the same way again, after all that's changed." Daenerys reached out, letting her hand hover over his wrist, before gently resting there. "We can send a raven, invite them to come. They may not wish to, but if they did, it might help ease things." She watched his expression carefully. "I know Sansa is proud and protective of the North. Perhaps if she sees King's Landing under my rule, sees that I'm not out to destroy everything, she might tolerate me better." Jon almost smiled, though it carried a trace of sorrow. "She might. It will still be tense, but I'm willing to try." They settled on that tentative plan, finishing their meager meal in weary companionship. When Daenerys finally rose, she staggered slightly, pressing a hand to her hip. It took her a moment to steady herself. The day had drained her more than she realized. Jon was at her side in an instant, a hand on her elbow to help her regain her balance. "Thank you," she murmured, letting him guide her toward the door. Outside, the unsullied guards stood like silent statues. Daenerys glanced at them, feeling a wave of gratitude that she had such disciplined men protecting her, but also recalling the hardness in Grey Worm's eyes since Missandei's death. He carried a grief she knew she could never truly soothe, though she hoped that restoring peace might give him space to heal. They parted ways with a gentle exchange of goodnights. Daenerys found her way to the modest set of chambers she was using, since the Queen's apartments were not yet deemed structurally sound. Once inside, she shed her outer robes and boots. Feeling a relief like stepping out of heavy chains, she sank onto the bed, head spinning with the swirl of the day's events. As she closed her eyes, she wondered what tomorrow would bring. New alliances, or old animosities. She wondered if the city could truly learn to love a queen who had arrived on the back of a dragon. Yet she clung to the faint hope that mercy, however late, might sow the seeds of something better. Morning came gently, with a pale sunlight trying to pierce through the lingering haze. Daenerys dressed in practical attire, a fitted tunic of dark gray and black breeches, boots that could handle the uneven streets. She pulled her silver gold hair back in a braid, pinning it up so it wouldn't fall into her face. It was not the regal attire of a queen in the Red Keep, but it served her purposes, and the people might find her more approachable in simpler garments. When she emerged onto one of the outer balconies, she found Drogon perched on the ruined parapet of a nearby tower. His scales glistened darkly in the sun, his massive wings folded. A rumbling sound vibrated in his throat when he sensed her gaze. She stared at him for a time, remembering how, on the day she took the city, his presence had been enough to strike terror into everyone who glanced skyward. Yet he too had lost so much, Regal and Viserion, his brothers. Now he was the last of his kind. A pang of sadness tugged at her, but she steadied it with a long breath. She descended into the courtyard, where a group of Unsullied was drilling, their spears flashing under Grey Worm's watchful eye. She made her way to him, passing stacks of confiscated Lannister arms. He stood rigid, posture as straight as a spear shaft, his face unreadable. At her approach, he inclined his head. "Good morning, my queen," he said in the clipped formal manner he had adopted since Missandei's death. Daenerys returned the nod. "Good morning. Have there been any incidents overnight?" "A few. We caught 4 men trying to loot a merchant's stall near Flea Bottom. They claimed they had no coin for food. They were turned over to your relief center this morning, assigned to haul water for the city." His words were precise, factual. No major violence otherwise. She allowed herself a small measure of relief. "Good. Keep me informed. And Grey Worm." She paused, uncertain how to phrase her next words. "I know you have lost much. I want you to know I'm grateful for your loyalty, for everything you've done." His face did not soften. It remained a mask of military discipline, though a flicker passed in his eyes. "I serve you, my queen." She wished she could find some phrase or gesture that would break the ice around his heart, but she accepted his words with a quiet nod. "Thank you," she said, letting her sincerity fill the silence. Then she moved on. Her morning routine took her into the city proper, flanked by a half-dozen Unsullied and a handful of northern guards. She wanted to see the state of the marketplaces and the bread lines for herself, to ensure the small folk were receiving what had been promised. Jon was supposed to meet her there, having gone ahead to speak with a group of fishermen who had navigated up the Blackwater, seeking safe passage to the open sea in return for feeding some of the population. She passed through the battered gates leading from the Red Keep, noticing the fresh scorch marks along the walls where dragonfire had licked the stone. The memory of that day was still vivid in her mind, the roiling anger, the heartbreak, and the choice: mercy over annihilation. She squared her shoulders, telling herself again that she had chosen well, that she had honored the memory of her truest ideals. In the streets, the people parted for her escort, some bowing hurriedly, others simply stepping aside in nervous haste. She tried to muster a reassuring smile when she caught someone's eye, but few dared look directly at the Targaryen queen. The tension was still there, raw as a half-healed wound. Yet she did see fewer expressions of outright terror, fewer shuttered doors. Perhaps time would do its work. At a large square near the charred remains of a former granary, she spotted several makeshift stalls handing out loaves of bread, bowls of thin broth, and cups of water. The lines were long, full of women and children, men with hollow cheeks, the elderly clutching canes. Daenerys let out a soft sigh of concern as she took in the length of those lines, the worry etched on each face. She signaled for her group to halt, then approached one of the volunteers, a broad-shouldered northern man, who wore a simple leather jerkin over his stark sigil. "How are rations holding?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of tension. He glanced at her, eyes widening as he recognized the queen. "We've enough for today, your grace, but it won't last the week unless more supply wagons come. My lord told me to expect more shipments from the Reach soon." "Now one." Daenerys nodded, casting a look at the line. "We'll see to it that more arrives. Thank you for your service." She saw how the man stood a bit straighter after the praise. She continued on, noticing the ragged shapes in the line, the children too thin for their age. She knelt beside one boy who was clutching a scrap of cloth around his shoulders. He stared at her with wide eyes, uncertain what to think of the queen kneeling in the dirt. Daenerys reached for a small chunk of bread in a basket a nearby volunteer held, offering it to him. He hesitated, then accepted it, biting into it hurriedly. She rested a gentle hand on his shoulder, wishing she could do more. Jon found her there, quietly observing. He was accompanied by 2 fishermen still smelling of salt and seaweed. On seeing Daenerys kneeling in the dust next to a child, he paused, a faint look of surprise crossing his face. She rose, dusting her knees. "Have you settled the matter with the fishermen?" she asked him. Jon nodded. "They'll supply fish to the city if we ensure their boats aren't harassed by our troops along the river. It's a fair arrangement. We'll move a couple of Dothraki outriders from the banks, so the fishermen can come and go safely." Daenerys murmured her approval, though she still felt that pang in her chest at the thought of how many mouths needed feeding. "I'll speak to Tyrion about ensuring the Dothraki stand down. The last thing I want is for them to burn a fishing skiff, because they think it poses a threat." Jon agreed, then fell into step beside her as they moved through the square. The morning sun was climbing higher, bringing a sharp clarity to the rubble and scorched stone. Every few steps, Daenerys caught glimpses of the city's battered soul. A woman with tears in her eyes clutching a basket of meager goods. A young man with one arm in a sling, limping from an injury sustained during the siege. An old man swaying on his feet. No family left. Each face told a story of pain and survival. Daenerys tried to meet those gazes without flinching. She had chosen mercy at the last, but war had still torn these people's lives apart. She felt Jon's presence at her side like a sturdy pillar, bracing her in the midst of the city's sorrow. Occasionally, she caught him giving her a sidelong glance, as if he recognized the weight on her shoulders, and knew she carried guilt for all this, even if it wasn't wholly her doing. Once, their eyes met directly, and she gave a subtle nod that said, "I'm all right." They made their way back toward the Red Keep around midday, accompanied by the shuffle of guards. Daenerys' stomach twisted with hunger, but she grimaced at the thought of eating more stale bread. She'd have to find something else. Perhaps Tyrion had arranged a midday meal with the new supplies. On the ramp leading up to the keep's inner gates, they encountered Sir Davos, who wore a tired smile beneath his gray beard. He offered them both a small bow. "Your Grace, Jon, we've got a bit of good news." Several supply wagons from Highgarden arrived sooner than expected. The Tyrell estates that remain loyal, well, they're short on men, but they're sending grain. I've ordered it distributed at once. Daenerys allowed a measure of relief to show on her face. "That is good news indeed. Let's see to it that the distribution is fair." "You needn't." Davos nodded. "On it already. Tyrion is personally overseeing it." They ascended into the keep's courtyard, where Unsullied patrolled with disciplined strides. The courtyard itself had been cleared of most rubble, though part of the eastern wall still showed cracks from the fighting. Daenerys paused, scanning the space. She could recall the day she flew overhead, Drogon's roar echoing off the stones, her fury nearly consuming her. Yet the scars left behind were not only in the stone. She breathed in slowly, trying to ground herself in the present. They found Tyrion near a cluster of newly arrived wagons, deep in discussion with a woman who wore the emblem of Highgarden. Stacks of burlap sacks were being unloaded by sweating laborers, while a handful of Dothraki hovered at a distance, eyeing the horses pulling the wagons. Daenerys approached, and Tyrion broke off his conversation, turning to greet her. "Your Grace," he said, gesturing at the wagons. "The first shipment arrived in better condition than we dared hope. Lady Rhonda here assures me more will follow if we protect their routes." Lady Rhonda, a tall, lean woman with lines of sun around her eyes, offered Daenerys a respectful dip of her head. "Highgarden stands ready to assist," she said. "We want to see the city recover. Our late mistress, Queen Marguerite, always spoke of caring for the small folk. I hope to honor that memory." Daenerys inclined her head. "Then you are most welcome. We'll ensure our patrols keep the roads safe for your caravans. In turn, I hope you'll continue to send relief, because the city's needs are great." "Danchen?" Lady Rhonda acknowledged the request with a sober expression, promising she would, before excusing herself to oversee her men. Tyrion watched her go, then turned back to Daenerys, wiping sweat from his brow. "These shipments will help keep order. Hungry people can turn dangerous, but we have to ensure some modicum of fairness in distribution. Already, the wealthier are trying to buy up large shares." Daenerys' eyes narrowed. "We can't allow that. They can purchase some at higher prices if they must, but not at the expense of the poor. Perhaps impose a rationing system that ensures the poorest can still afford to eat." "Mammond." Tyrion nodded, scribbling a quick note on a scrap of parchment. I'll see that it's enforced." He paused, lips pursed. "We also need to consider the next harvest, storing enough so that if winter hits again, or if more conflict arises, the city doesn't starve. We can't rely solely on immediate shipments." Jon stepped closer, arms folded across his chest. "We will speak with the farmers around the Crown lands, see how we can support them. If we rebuild their barns and mills, maybe they can increase production." Daenerys' gaze flicked between them. "Draw up the plans, coordinate with local stewards. Time is pressing." She paused, feeling the dryness in her throat and the ache in her muscles. She wondered if she would ever again feel like the confident conqueror she once appeared to be. Then she forced that reflection aside. The realm needed her steady hand, not her doubts. "I'll be in the throne room if anyone needs me," she said. "I'd rather keep my presence visible." She swept toward the inner castle, and Jon followed, with Tyrion trailing behind. The walk took them through winding corridors, past columns marred by the siege. Daenerys remembered the first day she entered these halls in triumph, the thunder of Drogon's wings overhead. It felt like another lifetime. Now, her steps were more measured, not quite so triumphant, carrying the weight of an entire city's survival. When she reached the Great Hall, she found it not empty as expected, but occupied by a dozen or so people scattered around, speaking in hushed voices. Some were city officials, left over from Cersei's regime but now trying to ingratiate themselves with the new queen. A few were lesser lords or knights, awaiting a moment to approach Daenerys. At the sight of her, they hastily formed a loose queue, uncertain if they should kneel or stand. Daenerys halted just inside the threshold, scanning their faces. She exchanged a glance with Jon, who gave her a quick, supportive nod, then peeled off to stand near the dais, hands clasped behind his back. Tyrion took his place at her side, always with that slight tilt of the head that signaled readiness to advise or intervene. Before she could even beckon the first person forward, the double doors behind them pushed open, and an unsullied guard stepped in to announce new arrivals. Daenerys tensed, uncertain who might have come unannounced. But her shoulders relaxed when she realized it was a small retinue of northern lords who had come earlier in the day. Among them stood Jon Royce, the gruff Lord of the Vale who had allied with Sansa Stark in past conflicts, and a few northern bannermen. Their expressions were carefully guarded as they stepped forward, the scrape of boots on the stone floor echoing. Jon Royce offered Daenerys a bow, then faced Jon. "We heard the announcement yesterday," he said, voice resonant. "So it's true. You are Aegon Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne." Jon's jaw tightened. "I am, but my place is here, supporting Daenerys Targaryen as queen. I'll only inherit if the need arises," he clarified. Royce exchanged a look with the men at his side, a silent conversation that Daenerys could almost decipher. She suspected they had come to test whether they could sway Jon, or glean how serious this arrangement was. At last, Royce cleared his throat. "We came to see if the North might gain more autonomy with you as heir." A flicker of tension gripped Daenerys' chest, but she kept her voice level as she interjected. "The North will be respected, as all the Seven Kingdoms should be. I understand the North suffered greatly under previous kings. I do not intend to repeat those mistakes. She looked at Jon, giving him a chance to speak for himself. Jon drew a careful breath. "We've all suffered, and the North did not stand alone in the fight against the dead. We're part of the realm, and as heir, I'll make sure our needs are not ignored. But I will not break from the rest of Westeros. This is our home, and Daenerys is our queen." "Nair? Royce studied him with a keen eye. Perhaps he remembered Jon as the king in the north, or the boy who had marched out of Winterfell at Sansa's side. But times had changed. "We will hold you to that, Lord Jon," he said at last, using a half-formal address. "Our loyalty to House Stark and the North remains. But if you say this is the best course, we will not move against the Queen." Daenerys inclined her head, exhaling slowly. "I will show you through my deeds that I value the North as I do every corner of this realm. If you have concerns, bring them to me or to Jon. We stand united." Royce grunted an acknowledgement, then bowed stiffly and withdrew, taking his men with him. The tension in the great hall subsided fractionally, though Daenerys could see in Tyrion's posture that he was taking mental note of every nuance. Even after the war's end, these political undercurrents could become riptides if not carefully navigated. The rest of the day was a blur of smaller concerns. Daenerys listened to new complaints, dispensed orders. She found she had to repeat certain instructions multiple times. Her mind was that weary. Tyrion and Jon stepped in when she faltered, each bridging the gap in their own way. By mid-afternoon, her head was pounding, and she gave Tyrion permission to wrap up the session. She stood, announcing that official audiences were over for the day. The supplicants filed out with a mix of disappointment and acceptance. She left the great hall, noticing the swirl of stone dust in the air. A chunk of the ceiling had collapsed in the siege, leaving the upper levels partially exposed to the elements. Repairs would be extensive and expensive, another burden for the new queen to bear. She told herself again that with the right alliances, with careful stewardship of resources, they could rebuild. She could make this a seat of justice, not just a monument to her own ambition. In one of the side corridors, she found a small table set with plates of stew and bread. Tyrion's doing, no doubt, an attempt to make sure she ate something. She sank onto a stone bench, feeling a dull ache in her back, and spooned a small portion of stew into her mouth. It was warm and salty, and she discovered she was ravenous. She ate more than she intended, her stomach protesting at first, then grateful. Jon stood off to the side, arms folded, though she could tell he was also in need of rest. Finally, he came over, took a bowl, and ate a few bites himself. They exchanged a tired glance, the unspoken understanding that, as strenuous as it was, this was still far better than raging war. She managed a faint smile. "No swords or dragonfire necessary," she said softly. "Just endless talking." He huffed a quiet laugh. "After the battles we've fought, a day of talking is a relief, even if it's exhausting in its own way." He finished his stew, then set the bowl aside. "I'm going to check on the fishermen's docks, make sure the new guard rotations are in place. Will you be all right?" She nodded. "I'm fine. Tyrion will likely need me to sign a few orders, then I might retreat for a moment of quiet." "Day." Jon offered a short bow, more respectful than necessary, then turned to go. Her eyes followed him until he was gone, feeling that familiar mix of gratitude and sorrow where he was concerned. Naming him, her heir, had been the right choice. She felt it in her bones, but part of her feared how it might complicate the realm, might overshadow her attempts to be seen as the primary monarch. Still, she would stay the course. They had enough trouble already without second-guessing an arrangement. They had only just begun. She spent another hour with Tyrion, reviewing the supply situation, drafting a series of proclamations for the Crownlands, and planning how to fortify the roads. The monotony grated on her nerves. Once she had soared with her dragons, conquering entire cities with a single command. Now, the scale of her new battle was quieter, but no less daunting. When Tyrion finally departed, Daenerys pressed her hands over her face, rubbing her eyes. Her mind felt like a battered fortress. Late in the day, she ventured to the top of the Red Keep's tallest intact tower, seeking a moment of solitude. A set of spiral stairs led her to a small rooftop platform. The stone battlements were crumbling in places, the mortar cracked. Yet the view was majestic. The entire city spread out below, rooftops of blackened tile and winding alleys. The Blackwater Bay stretched beyond, touched by the orange glow of a sun that drifted toward the horizon. She stepped closer to the edge, her cloak rustling in the wind. Drogon, sensing her presence, descended from the tower's upper spire with a rush of massive wings. He landed behind her, the impact jarring the stone, and she turned to lay a hand on his warm scales. He let out a deep rumble, his golden eyes fixed on her. She stroked the side of his face, remembering the first moment she felt him stirring in that stone egg so many years ago. He pressed closer, exhaling a wave of hot breath, and she felt it ripple through her hair. The sun caught the faint gleam of red in the membranes of his wings. Though she had no words to speak to him, She let her silence become a form of communication, telling him without speech that they were safe here, for now, that their battles had changed shape. He huffed, as if in acknowledgement, then folded his wings more tightly. Turning back to the view, Daenerys' gaze traveled across the city to the Red Keep's walls, to the gates, and the roads beyond. She could spot tiny columns of horses moving in the distance, likely her soldiers or some traveling merchants. The breeze carried the faint scent of ash, even now, layered atop the brine of the sea. It reminded her that the city still smoldered with the memory of dragonfire, that she had nearly let her anger consume everything and everyone. A swirl of guilt touched her heart. She had chosen mercy, but only at the final moment. Was that enough for the realm to trust her? Would she trust herself if, in the future, another moment of crisis arrived? She closed her eyes for a time, trying to find some kernel of peace in the swirl of doubt. She pictured the farmers in the Crownlands returning to their fields, unafraid. She pictured children in King's Landing playing in streets, free of fear. Breadlines replaced by fair markets. She pictured the lords of Westeros gathering, not to plot or wage war, but to celebrate prosperity. She could see it, shimmering in her mind's eye. But it felt so far away. Yet for the sake of everything she had lost, for the sake of Missandei, Rhaegal, Viserion, Jorah, and so many others, she needed to believe it was possible. Night had settled in by the time she finally descended the tower. She found herself accompanied by Drogon, who climbed onto another parapet and perched there like a silent sentinel. The faint glow of torches along the castle walls cast dancing shadows that made the dragon's silhouette appear monstrous and regal, all at once. Guards along the battlements gave the creature a wide berth, though they had grown somewhat accustomed to his presence. Daenerys made her way through the keep, passing the empty throne room. The Iron Throne loomed in the darkness, like a mythic beast forged from swords. She almost paused, drawn by the eerie sight, but she continued on, feeling a shiver she couldn't quite place. She returned to her simpler chamber, where a single candle flickered on the table. She sat on the edge of the bed, removing her boots, letting the day's weariness wash over her. She allowed her mind to wander to Jon again, his quiet resolve, the steadiness in his eyes. She recalled the warmth they once shared, a bond that felt too precarious to fully restore yet. But at least she was not alone. At least he stood beside her. Whether they would ever bridge that intimacy again, she did not know. She suspected it would take time, and she was no longer certain how she felt about reuniting in that way. Perhaps they had something stronger now, a respect forged in the crucible of the realm's trials. As she lay back on the bed, the candlelight playing against the cracks in the ceiling, she found herself thinking about the next steps. Stabilizing the Crownlands, ensuring the North felt respected, dealing with any rebellious lords still loyal to Cersei or the memory of the Lannisters. She thought of the uncertain fate of Cersei herself, her body never found. Daenerys felt no desire to hunt a ghost if the woman truly lay buried under rubble, but part of her remained uneasy that no proof of Cersei's demise had emerged. For now, though, she could do little about it besides telling her men to keep eyes and ears open. Her eyelids grew heavy, her thoughts drifting. She remembered the day's petitions, the hungry, the lost, and resolved anew to keep working toward a kinder rule than the Targaryens of old. If tomorrow was half as busy as today, she would need every ounce of rest. She let her eyes fall closed, letting the candle burn down in a soft glow. Sleep took her in gentle waves. Day after day followed, each shaped by a swirl of duties. Daenerys found a fragile rhythm. Mornings spent in the city, afternoons holding court, evenings conferring with advisors. Jon balanced his own tasks, managing the northern presence, liaising with newly arrived lords, negotiating the complexities of the city's defenses. Tyrion oversaw the flow of supplies, hammered out trade agreements, and read every raven that arrived. Sir Davos, Grey Worm, and the Unsullied patrolled relentlessly, quelling the last remnants of chaos. Slowly, the tension in the streets began to ease. A month passed in this manner, the days blurring into a tapestry of small victories and persistent challenges. Grain flowed more steadily from the Reach. Fishermen brought in fresh catch, and some of the city's markets reopened. Hope sprouted in the hearts of the small folk, though mistrust still lingered like a bruise that had not quite healed. At times, Daenerys would ride Drogon high above the city, letting the people see the dragon's mighty form in the sky, ensuring that criminals understood the queen's vigilance. Yet she never unleashed his fire upon them. The memory of that near catastrophe weighed in her heart, a cautionary anchor. Word reached them that Sansa Stark had called a council in Winterfell to discuss the developments in King's Landing. Arya, too, was reportedly present, though she seldom lingered in one place for long. No direct response came to Daenerys' invitation. Whether they would journey south or not remained uncertain. Daenerys busied herself with the tasks at hand, choosing not to dwell on the friction that might await if they did come. In the quieter moments, Daenerys could almost feel the city itself breathing, recovering from its wounds. She remembered how Meereen had taken shape under her rule, how the freed slaves' gratitude fueled her resolve, even when the sons of the Harpy attacked in the shadows. Here in Westeros, the people were not enslaved, but they were battered by tyranny, poverty, and war. Perhaps in time, they would understand that her vow to protect them was sincere. Late one afternoon, she stood on a half-repaired balcony overlooking the sea, listening to the lapping of waves against the walls. Jon joined her there, silent at first, leaning his forearms on the stone railing. A gull cried overhead, and the salt breeze tugged at their hair. "Some days," Jon said quietly, "I wish I could leave all this behind. Just take a boat to the open sea, find a remote shore. But then I remember what's at stake. I never asked to be Aegon Targaryen. And..." She nodded, understanding. "I never asked to be the last living child of the Mad King. But this is who we are, and the realm needs us, whether they know it or not." He glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "You're doing good work, Dany. I see it every day. So do the people." She swallowed, letting that affirmation settle into her heart. "I hope so." They watched the waves for a time, the hush between them less charged than before, more companionable. She felt Drogon's distant presence in the sky behind them, and the rhythmic sound of the waves below reminding her that life continued regardless of the turmoil in mortal hearts. Eventually they retreated inside, for there were always more decisions to make, more letters to read, more conflicts to settle. But as Daenerys traversed the corridors, she carried a small spark of hope deep in her chest. She had come so close to darkness, had nearly allowed her anguish to drown her in fire and vengeance. Instead, she had chosen a different path, one paved with toil and compromise, perhaps less glorious but more worthy. In naming Jon her heir, she had taken a step toward trust rather than fear. And though it was only the beginning, each new day brought them closer to the promise of a better tomorrow. The morning sky was awash of delicate blues and pinks, a layer of thin clouds catching the early sun and reflecting it down over the rooftops of King's Landing. Daenerys rose from her bed, the echo of a dream still lingering in her mind, something about dragons circling a dark horizon. She couldn't fully recall it, but there had been an uneasy sensation when she opened her eyes. She stretched, the stiff ache of yesterday's labor in her muscles, and reminded herself that she had chosen this path. Another day to rule, to rebuild, to prove to the realm that she was not the monster they once feared she might become. She dressed in a simple tunic and breeches, laced up practical boots and, as always, pulled her hair into an intricate braid. Though she still bore the name of Targaryen, the breaker of chains, her attire had become more functional than regal. She wanted no barrier to moving through the city, to walking among the people, and to demonstrating the kind of queen she intended to be. Out in the corridor, two unsullied stood guard. They stiffened when she emerged, spears striking the ground in crisp greeting. She nodded, acknowledging their presence with a brief smile. There was still a reserve in her exchanges with them. She had hoped to ease Grey Worm's heartbreak in some way, but he remained distant. Loyal, but his spirit was guarded. She supposed no amount of kind words would resurrect Missandei or return the peace he once knew in her presence. The halls showed new signs of patchwork repair. Rubble carted away, chunks of stone replaced, burned timbers swapped out. Since her decision not to raise the city, Daenerys had poured resources into rebuilding, though progress felt painfully slow. Still, compared to the wreck she had first walked through, these incremental improvements reminded her that the city was healing, bit by bit. A drifting smell of bread baking and stew simmering reached her from a distant kitchen. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but rather than seek her own meal, she made her way to the small tower room serving as a temporary council chamber. She found Tyrion there, standing by a table littered with parchment. He held a quill in his hand, tapping it absently against the wood while he read through a fresh letter. He glanced up, blinking. "Your Grace," he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I have a raven from the Trident. They report that a band of deserters from the Lannister ranks is causing trouble along the King's Road, robbing travelers under the guise of collecting taxes for the Queen. They use your name but certainly don't serve you." "Then no." Daenerys let out a slow breath. "How many are they?" Tyrion shrugged, setting the parchment down. "No more than 24 from what the scout says, but it only takes a handful to wreak havoc among small folk. We can send a dispatch of Unsullied, or perhaps some of the northern soldiers who remain." She leaned over the table, scanning the letter for herself. The words were neat but urgent, describing these rogues and their brutality. "We'll send a small force," she confirmed. "I'd prefer northern soldiers for this. The sight of the Unsullied might be too alarming on the open road. Small folk have seen enough foreign armies. And the Dothraki?" She paused, considering. "No, we don't need frightened villagers thinking the Dothraki are raiding. Have Jon pick a detachment from his men. They'll put these deserters to flight or capture them." Tyrion nodded, looking relieved. "A wise choice. They respect Jon's presence, and it shows we're serious about punishing criminals who misuse your name." "Then to one." Daenerys ran a hand over her braid, focusing on the next matter. "Anything else pressing this morning?" "A delegation from the Iron Islands arrived late last night. They're waiting for you in the Great Hall, though they didn't say much beyond wanting to speak on trade rights. With Lady Yara Greyjoy's ascension, they claim the seas around Pike are more stable. They likely want official backing to prevent any retributive raids against them, or to secure favorable terms for shipping." Tyrion glanced at his notes. "They have only a handful in their party, presumably a token representation." Daenerys turned that over in her mind. "I'd like to keep the Ironborn as allies, or at least not antagonize them. Send them in for an audience soon. First I'll handle whatever I must with the small council." She paused, pressing her lips together. "Jon, do you know where he is?" Tyrion grimaced. "Likely at the armory, overseeing repairs to equipment or instructing some of his men. He's been keeping busy as always." She nodded. "Good. Let him know I want him with me when I meet the Ironborn. They respect strength, and seeing my heir at my side might remind them that the realm stands united under me." Tyrion swallowed a small flicker of humor, though he didn't let it slip into his voice. "I'll pass along the message." Moments later, the scuff of boots in the corridor announced Jon's arrival. He entered in simpler clothing than even Daenerys wore, a plain leather jerkin over dark trousers, though a silver direwolf clasp still held his cloak. His hair was pulled back, but wisps framed his face, and he looked suitably exhausted for an early hour. At once, Daenerys felt a subtle warmth in his presence, a sense that he was her partner in this complicated new world. She gestured for him to approach the table. "Tyrion says we have Lannister deserters on the King's Road," she explained, meeting his eyes. "We need to send men to put them down. Will you see to it?" "Dandan Warwine." Jon inclined his head, a small frown appearing. "Yes. I'll gather a detachment. I might even lead them myself if it's urgent." She considered that. It could be a week's journey there and back, perhaps more. "I want you here if something unexpected occurs, especially with the arrivals we keep getting. Could you send a trusted officer?" He paused, exhaling. "I can. A northern captain named Daeron is capable and level-headed." He gave her a searching look. "Unless you feel it absolutely needs me, I'll stay here." She held his gaze for a beat. "I appreciate it. The Ironborn delegation is waiting to speak with us, and I'd rather keep a united front." A small flick of her eyes toward Tyrion was enough to remind them all of how precarious alliances could be if the Queen was perceived as isolated. "We can't risk old grudges now." Understood, Jon said. He turned to Tyrion. I'll speak to Captain Darren after this meeting with the Ironborn. Tyrion nodded, folding the parchment into a neat square. I'll arrange things on my end. Should we convene in the Great Hall in an hour? Daenerys assented. Let them wait just long enough to know we hold the power, but not so long that they feel insulted. When Tyrion left the tower room, taking a sheaf of notes with him, Daenerys and Jon lingered. For a moment, neither spoke. The hush felt oddly personal. No guards, no advisors. Just the two of them amidst the gloom of old stone and the promise of daylight that filtered through the high windows. She studied him, noticing the fine lines of fatigue around his eyes. You look tired, she said gently, though she herself was hardly well rested. He managed a wry half-smile. I've never been good at politics. I'd rather face an army of whites than sit in endless meetings. But I won't shirk my duty. He paused, glancing down. You? How do you fare? She fought the urge to answer with a stiff nod of reassurance. Instead, she let out a weary sigh. It's not easy, yet it feels right. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd lost myself that day. If I'd burned the city. She swallowed, meeting his gaze. The nightmares still come. I see flames. I hear screams. But then I remember, I didn't do it. And that helped. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You did the right thing. We'll make sure all of this rebuilding, is worth the sacrifices made. And you're not alone. For a heartbeat, she felt the old warmth, that flicker of closeness she once thought lost, after they discovered his true parentage. There was too much history between them now, too much heartbreak, to simply fall into each other's arms. But the quiet solidarity in his voice reassured her. She nodded and let the moment pass without pressing it further. Duty called them both. An hour later, Daenerys stood in the Great Hall, which was still undergoing repairs. Large sections of the vaulted ceiling had been shored up with wooden beams, and scaffolding lined the far wall. Workers in plain clothes bustled quietly, clearing debris and carting supplies, each pausing to bow or curtsy to her before continuing their labor. The Iron Throne, ironically intact despite the partial collapse of the roof, loomed at the hall's end, a reminder of the seat she had claimed through fire and mercy. Jon stood at her right, Tyrion at her left. Grey Worm and several unsullied guards formed a stoic perimeter. Before them, the Ironborn delegation waited. 5 men and a single woman, all dressed in seafaring leathers and cloaks that smelled faintly of salt. 2 carried short axes at their belts, though they made no overtly threatening moves. The one in front stepped forward, a solidly built man with braided hair and scars crossing his forearms. He introduced himself as Torrhen Pike, acting envoy of Lady Yara Greyjoy. Torrhen's gaze briefly flicked to Jon, then back to Daenerys. He bowed, short and blunt. We come from the Iron Islands to petition for safe passage of our ships in the narrow sea and the coastlines of Westeros. Lady Yara has consolidated her rule, but we face difficulties from certain lords who still view Ironborn vessels as pirate ships. We want official recognition of our shipping routes, so we can trade freely. Daenerys inclined her head, feeling the subtle tension in the hall. The Iron Islands pledged themselves to me once, through Lady Yara. She aided in my cause, defying Euron Greyjoy. But that was before the war turned in unexpected directions. Is she still loyal to the crown? No. Torrhen nodded. She is, Your Grace. Lady Yara stands by the alliance. She asks for your formal declaration that the seas around the Iron Islands are under her protection, that no Westerosi banners shall harass our ships so long as we abide by the laws of the realm. Tyrion shifted, glancing at Daenerys, who met his gaze briefly. Jon's brow furrowed, but he said nothing yet. She raised her voice, addressing Torrhen. I'm willing to reaffirm Lady Yara's right to govern the Iron Islands and to protect their waters, so long as she and her fleets honor the laws of Westeros. No raiding, no forced tribute from coastal towns. If they abide by that, then we can formalize their shipping lanes. A faint flicker passed in Torrhen's eyes, something akin to relief or perhaps pride. We have no intention of returning to the old ways of reaving, not under Lady Yara. We only want to rebuild, as the rest of Westeros does. He paused, glancing at the men behind him. There's more. We also seek your support in fortifying the Isles against threats from the west. There are rumors of scattered Ironborn loyalists who refuse to recognize Yara's rule, men who might attempt to claim Pike by force. And Daenerys felt Tyrion's gaze flick to her again, but she kept her attention on Torrhen. What would you have me do? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. If a rebellion forms, Lady Yara wants to know if the crown will send reinforcements, ships or men, to quell it. If not, she must plan accordingly, perhaps forging alliances with other fleets or hiring mercenaries. Nebistartle. Jon spoke then, his voice calm but firm. Isn't that your responsibility, to quell rebellions in your own territory? Torrhen bristled slightly, but maintained respect. It is Lord Snow. He stopped himself, perhaps recalling Jon's Targaryen heritage, then pressed on. But it would be a sign of loyalty if the Queen stood beside us. We might handle it alone, but the gesture would strengthen ties. Daenerys considered. She remembered how Theon Greyjoy had sought redemption, how Yara had risked her life and ships in Daenerys' service. She had not forgotten those debts. Still, open support meant committing troops to a distant location. With King's Landing still vulnerable, was it worth the cost? Tell Lady Yara, Daenerys said slowly, that should a serious threat to her rule arise, I will weigh the situation and send aid if it aligns with the realm's stability. But we cannot spare many forces while the capital is still rebuilding. She paused, catching Jon's expression. If Yara continues to prove her loyalty, I will do what I can. Let's begin by formalizing trade routes and non-aggression pacts. Tyrion will draft the documents. Torrhen bowed. Thank you, Your Grace. That is more than fair. We'll return to Pike and deliver your words. Daenerys motioned for the Unsullied to step forward with Tyrion, who carried a small chest containing scrolls and a wax seal. They murmured among themselves, working out the practical details. Jon remained at Daenerys' side, arms folded, a hint of vigilance in his posture. She appreciated his presence more than she wanted to admit. When the meeting concluded, Torrhen Pike and his retinue bowed one last time, stepping back to depart. Daenerys watched them go, noticing the purposeful way they held themselves, as if proud to be recognized by the new regime. Once they were out of earshot, she turned to Jon and Tyrion. They're loyal enough for now, she said. But I sense the Ironborn are always wary of others claiming the seas. We'll need to keep an eye on them. Tyrion nodded. We'll confirm the treaty as soon as possible. I'll mention it to Davos as well. See what he advises regarding maritime defenses. Then, Jon's gaze lingered on the empty space the Ironborn had occupied. It's strange how quickly we've pivoted from one war to the next threat of rebellion. We never truly get peace, do we? Daenerys sighed, leading them out of the great hall. Peace comes in brief intervals, and it's up to us to lengthen those intervals as much as we can. That's what I intend to do. We can't let the realm fall back into chaos after all we've done. She gave a short nod. I need some air. Tyrion, see to the final details. Namnain. Jon followed as she swept through a side corridor and up a winding staircase that led to an open-air walkway overlooking the courtyard. Workers below pushed carts of stone and lumber, while Unsullied kept watch at intervals. Parts of the keep's outer wall were still cracked, but the courtyard itself looked far cleaner than it had weeks ago. She braced her hands on the stone parapet, gazing down. Sunlight spilled across the pale stone, and she caught sight of Grey Worm directing a group of soldiers. Off to the left, some Dothraki riders trotted their horses near the stables, restless energy brimming in their eyes. King's Landing was no longer aflame, but it still bore the scars of war. Jon stepped up beside her, folding his arms across his chest. You handled them well, he said quietly. The Ironborn can be stubborn, but you struck the right balance. She shrugged, the corners of her mouth curving into a faint smile. I had practice with Theon, and I liked Yara. She was straightforward. So many lords wrap their words in deception, but the Ironborn are blunt. Jon nodded. They watched the courtyard for a while, letting the bustle of midday life form a backdrop to their thoughts. Daenerys felt a moment of calm, grateful for the lull between constant meetings. The breeze carried a whisper of salt from the bay. She turned slightly, regarding Joan's profile. "You should speak to Captain Darren," she reminded him. "We can't let those deserters terrorize travelers. I'd like you to pick the men carefully. Ones who won't just kill them without reason. If they surrender, we can imprison them. I want the realm to see that I offer justice, not mindless violence." John dipped his head in agreement. "I'll see it done. Darren is a good man, thoughtful but firm. He won't slaughter needlessly." His dark eyes flicked to hers. "You really are trying to show a gentler side." She felt a twinge at his words, and she let out a slow breath. "I meant what I said when we first arrived in King's Landing. I don't want to rule by fear. The realm has had enough tyrants." She paused, recalling how close she had come to being one herself. "If I must make war, I will. But only to protect what we're building." He touched her shoulder gently, a small, reassuring squeeze that sparked warmth in her chest. "I know." They parted ways. John headed off to find Captain Darren. Daenerys descending into the corridors where Tyrion caught up with her, brandishing yet another roll of parchment. She suppressed a sigh and steeled herself for another set of negotiations with local merchants. This was the reality of queenship, an endless chain of decisions, each shaping the realm in ways large and small. The afternoon proved no less busy. First, a group of Braavosi bankers who claimed the crown owed them interest from debts accumulated under Cersei. Then a congregation of Septons petitioning for funds to rebuild the great septi that had been destroyed by a wildfire. Daenerys felt her mind teeter under the cumulative weight of so many requests. Each demanded resources, coin, or men, and each had its own logic for why it should take priority over everything else. By the time dusk arrived, Daenerys was sapped of energy. She excused herself from the final discussion, leaving Tyrion to conclude with the Septons about the supply of stone. She walked the Red Keep's corridors alone, footsteps echoing on the warm floor. She knew she should eat, but the knot in her stomach left her appetite wanting. Instead, she climbed to the old library tower, hoping to find a moment's quiet among the dusty tomes. She discovered the library in disarray, likely from the chaos of the siege. Shelves had toppled, and piles of books were stacked haphazardly in corners. A single candle flickered near a table strewn with scrolls. One of her advisors, an older man named Karen, who had served as a scribe under Cersei, was attempting to organize the mess. He jerked upright at her entrance, eyes wide. "Your Grace," he managed, bowing awkwardly. I thought I might salvage some of the historical records here. They're scattered everywhere." She nodded, appreciating his initiative. "Thank you. This knowledge belongs to the realm. We should preserve it." She wandered among the cluttered shelves, letting her fingertips graze the spines of mildewed volumes. Some were histories of Targaryen kings, others religious texts. She paused at a large tome bound in green leather, the gilded text on its spine half worn away. The seven-pointed star, or perhaps a local genealogical record. She tilted her head, considering whether to pick it up, but her attention was drawn by a draft from a broken window near the far end. She approached, stepping over scattered parchment. A shattered pane let in the cool evening air, and she glimpsed the city below, darkening into night. A memory came unbidden. The day she arrived, how the city had loomed ahead, and she believed it would all fall neatly under her rule. That ambition had nearly destroyed her. Now, she stood at this broken window, wearing no crown, wielding an authority tempered by caution and empathy. It wasn't the dream she once envisioned, but perhaps it was more real. Karen continued sorting through books, muttering quietly about water damage. Daenerys offered to help, though she could do little more than lift a few volumes and place them on a stable shelf. As she did, she glanced over the titles. The Reign of Aegon Set, The Children of the Forest, A Study, and The Lives of Four Kings, among others. She paused on one that read The Last Storm, A History of Storm's End. It reminded her of how Gendry Baratheon had once come to her side, forging weapons against the undead, how she had legitimized him for his service. She recalled his wide-eyed gratitude, so many pieces scattered across the chessboard of the realm. When she returned to the corridor, A small pang of hunger finally reminded her that she hadn't eaten. She found her way to a modest dining chamber, where a pot of stew, bread, and a pitcher of wine sat waiting. Likely, Tyrion or Davos had ordered that she be fed properly. She sank onto a bench, ladled some stew into a bowl, and ate slowly, letting the savory warmth fill her belly. A tap on the doorframe interrupted her. She glanced up to see Jon, wearing an air of exhaustion that matched her own. He gave a half smile, stepping inside. "Mind if I join you?" She gestured toward the spread of stew and bread. "Please, there's enough for two. Actually, it might be too much for just me." "Now there's supposed to be." Jon took a seat across from her, filling his own bowl. They ate for a few moments in companionable silence. Outside the narrow windows, the sky had darkened to an inky blue, pinpricks of stars beginning to shimmer. The torches in the courtyard below flickered, and the silhouettes of Unsullied on patrol passed like silent wraiths. "How did the discussion with Captain Darren go?" Daenerys asked, sipping from a cup of watered wine. Jon wiped his mouth on a napkin. "He'll leave before dawn with a group of 20 men. Enough to handle 24 brigands without risking heavy losses. He asked if we wanted them taken captive or killed." Jon paused, searching her expression. "I told him to offer a chance to surrender, bring them back to the city for trial if possible." She nodded. "Good. It's important the people see that. Even criminals deserve a chance to bend the knee to justice." He took a bite of bread, chewing thoughtfully. "A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined you saying something like that," he said quietly, not unkindly. She closed her eyes for a moment. "A year ago, I was a different person. Or maybe I was the same person who hadn't realized the full weight of what lay before me. I've made mistakes. I'll keep making them. But at least I'm trying to be better than the legacy that haunts my name." "Now worry." Jon offered her a gentle look. "We all carry legacies we didn't choose." They finished their meal in companionable quiet. When Daenerys finally pushed her bowl aside, she leaned back, feeling the day's fatigue settle in her bones. The castle's corridors beyond were quiet now, only a few distant voices and the echo of footsteps on stone. Jon regarded her, eyes dark with concern. "You should rest," he said softly. "You've done enough for one day." She smiled wryly. "If only the realm agreed. But yes, I'll sleep soon." He nodded. They stood, and for an instant, neither moved, as though something unspoken hovered between them. Then Daenerys cleared her throat, stepping around the table. Jon followed her into the corridor, and they exchanged a warm farewell. When he departed, she watched him go, the familiarity of his presence lingering in the air like a comforting shadow. She made her way to the modest chambers she used for sleep. Though many parts of the keep remained damaged, she had found a smaller suite that was mostly intact, away from the crumbling queen's apartments. A single candle flickered on a wooden desk. Daenerys unfastened her cloak, letting it drape over a chair, then removed her boots. The bed looked inviting, but her mind still hummed with the day's events, unwilling to yield so quickly to slumber. At last, she lay on the mattress and closed her eyes. Whispers of old fears crept in, flashes of dragons overhead, bells ringing, the roar of flames. But she forced them back, reminding herself of the slow, steady progress they had achieved. Sleep came in fits, but eventually she drifted into deeper rest. Dawn arrived with a gentle glow, and Daenerys woke feeling marginally better. After dressing, she decided to walk the city before the sun rose too high, hoping to catch a glimpse of how the streets fared without the press of midday. Grey Worm insisted on sending a small squad of Unsullied to accompany her, but she made them hang back at a discreet distance so she might see things without intimidating the people. Jon was occupied with his tasks for the day. She had heard he planned to inspect the bay defenses, so Daenerys stepped through the Red Keep's gates alone, save for the half-dozen silent guards. The morning air was cool, brushing across her cheeks. The city, bathed in soft early light, revealed scars of collapsed buildings and scorched facades. Yet she also noticed people moving about with more confidence than when she had first taken control. Shopkeepers lifted shutters, hawkers prepared their stalls, and a handful of children chased each other around corners, shrieking with laughter. She made her way through the wider streets first, eventually delving into the less affluent areas near Flea Bottom. The stench of refuse still lingered, and many structures were half in ruin. Yet, under her rule, teams had begun clearing debris, and a rudimentary sewage system was being repaired. Some of the dwellings had fresh boards and patches in the roofs. People recognized her as she passed, some with respect, others with lingering apprehension. Daenerys responded with polite nods, trying to appear approachable. A few older men offered half-bows, and she caught the uncertain flicker in their eyes. In a small square flanked by ramshackle buildings, volunteers distributed bread. A ragged line of men, women, and children formed, the stench of unwashed bodies heavy in the still air. Daenerys paused, letting the Unsullied linger a short distance away, and approached the volunteer, a young woman with sun-darkened skin. The woman looked up, startled by the Queen's sudden presence. "How goes the distribution?" Daenerys asked softly. "We manage," the woman replied, swallowing nervously. "We have loaves from the shipments out of Highgarden. Not enough for everyone to feel satisfied, but it keeps them from starving." Daenerys inhaled, scanning the line. "We'll continue to bring more. The city's granaries are still being refilled, but each week it improves." A small voice piped up. "Are you the Dragon Queen?" Daenerys turned to see a child, perhaps 6 years old, hair in messy tangles, clutching a torn piece of cloth around her shoulders. The child's eyes were wide with curiosity, not fear. Daenerys crouched, meeting the child at eye level. "I am, yes." The girl studied her face. "Papa says you could have burned us all, but you didn't. He said we should be grateful." Daenerys felt a sting of guilt. "Your papa is wise," she managed softly, "though I wish there had been no fighting at all." The child regarded her a moment longer, then nodded, as if deciding Daenerys was acceptable. She shuffled forward to claim her piece of bread, the volunteer pressing it into her small hands. As the girl skipped away, Daenerys exhaled, standing up again. Throughout the morning, she continued her circuit, encountering pockets of both gratitude and wariness. By midday, she had circled back to the gates leading to the Red Keep. Her feet ached, and the sun had risen high, beating down on the city's stone structures. She passed under the archway, noticing at once an unusual commotion in the courtyard beyond. A small cluster of northern soldiers had gathered near the stables, talking in low, agitated voices. Grey Worm's stance was rigid as he faced a man wearing a stark sigil. Daenerys hastened her step, anxious about any new conflict. As she approached, she heard bits of heated conversation. "Didn't mean offense," the Stark soldier was saying. "He's just a boy. But your men threatened him." Grey Worm's mouth was drawn taut. "He threw a stone at one of the Unsullied. We do not allow that." Daenerys inserted herself between them, the tension palpable. "What happened?" she asked, voice level. The Stark soldier bowed his head respectfully. "Your Grace, a young lad. Some stable boy threw a stone at one of the Unsullied's helmets. Didn't do any real harm. But the Unsullied are upset. They say that's an act of aggression." "Themselves." Grey Worm nodded tersely. "We do not tolerate disrespect. The boy might do worse if we allow it." Daenerys glanced between them. She understood both sides. The Unsullied, scarred by countless battles, accustomed to unwavering discipline. The northern soldier defending a foolish child's act. She steadied her tone. "Where is the boy now?" "Captain took him aside," the soldier replied, nodding toward the stables. "He's terrified." Daenerys strode in that direction, Grey Worm following, the northern soldier at her heels. She found a lanky teenage boy, straw in his hair, trembling as he pressed himself against the stable's wooden wall. An Unsullied guard towered over him. The boy's eyes darted frantically when Daenerys appeared. She lifted a hand, motioning the Unsullied to step back. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Eric," the boy stammered. "I'm sorry, my queen. I saw them and I..." He trailed off, tears threatening in his eyes. "My uncle died in the fighting when the Unsullied took the city. He was a guard, but he surrendered, and they killed him anyway. So, His voice broke, guilt choking him. Daenerys felt a pang in her chest. She forced herself to remain calm. You must understand, tensions were high then. People on both sides died. She stepped closer, but not too close, sensing his fear. What you did was foolish, but I won't let them harm you for a single stone. Will you promise never to assault my guards again? Eric nodded fervently, tears streaking his cheeks. I swear, I'm sorry. She looked to Grey Worm, who stood rigid, remembering the hardships the Unsullied endured. She spoke in a measured tone. He's just a boy acting out of grief. Show mercy. If he does it again, he'll face harsher punishment. For now, let him go. Grey Worm's gaze flicked to her, a tension in his jaw. As you command. She turned back to Eric. Go back to your work. If you have anger, direct it into helping rebuild this city. That's the best way to honor your uncle. The boy wiped at his face, murmured a shaky "Aye, your grace," and retreated deeper into the stables, eager to be away from the scene. Daenerys studied Grey Worm, who offered no open reproach, but she saw the cold flicker in his eyes. She laid a hand lightly on his arm. We're all wounded, she said, voice hushed. Let's not punish children for their pain. He gave a curt nod, then stepped away, returning to his post. Daenerys watched him go, feeling the weight of old hurts. The northern soldier beside her exhaled in relief, expressing quiet thanks before leaving as well. Daenerys stared at the stable door, thinking again of how close the city had come to total ruin. How many still struggled with loss? She walked away, her mood subdued by the reminder that the city's scars were not merely physical. She found Jon in the courtyard soon after, emerging from an adjacent passage, his expression tinged with concern. He must have heard the commotion. They met eyes, and he lifted his brows in silent question. She shook her head as if to say it was resolved. He came to her side, glancing after Grey Worm, who now marched along the ramparts with a handful of Unsullied. Everything all right? Jon asked softly. Daenerys managed a thin smile. It will be. Just a stable boy with a grudge, a memory of a lost uncle. Jon's gaze followed Grey Worm. There's a lot of that on both sides. Healing will take time. Now. They walked together into the keep, side by side. Servants bowed in passing, stepping aside in narrow corridors. The hush of the Red Keep felt almost oppressive after the city's open air, but it also promised a sort of sanctuary from the raw tensions outside. Daenerys guided Jon to a small chamber used for storing maps of Westeros, a room once used for war councils, now repurposed for administrative planning. She shut the door behind them, and the two of them stood amid charts pinned to the walls, quill marks outlining roads and supply lines. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows, dust motes swirling in the beams. Jon tilted his head. Is something on your mind? She nodded, crossing her arms loosely. I'm worried about Grey Worm, about the Unsullied. They've endured so much. Some of them lost close friends in the siege, and they all lost Missandei, who was dear to them. Now they see the same people they fought, and some resentment lingers on both sides. Jon considered that, his eyes darkening with empathy. We can't mend hearts overnight, but we can set examples, like you did with that boy, or how we punish criminals without butchery. We just have to stay vigilant. Nas. She let out a slow breath. Yes, it feels like walking a tightrope. One misstep and everything collapses. He nodded, stepping closer. I know the feeling. At Winterfell, after the Great War, there were tensions with the Free Folk, and some lords refused to accept what needed their help. Old grudges don't vanish just because a treaty is signed. He lifted a shoulder. But if we keep at it, keep showing them a better way, maybe we'll tip the balance. Or so I have to believe. She found solace in his words, letting a small, genuine smile cross her lips. Then that's what we'll do. Together, they took a moment to look over the maps pinned to the walls. The Crownlands, the Reach, the North, the Westerlands. Markings indicated where new roads needed repairs, or where smaller communities still lacked stable leadership. The realm was vast, and each day brought a new crisis or a new hope. Daenerys told Jon of a plan Tyrion had proposed, to host a gathering of lords in a few months' time, once the harvest was in, so they could discuss a new code of laws that might unify the realm. Jon mulled over the idea. A code of laws that extends through all the 7 kingdoms? Ambitious, but it might be what we need. Something that ensures no one is above justice. It'll be hard, though. The lords love their autonomy. Daenerys traced her fingertip along the lines of the map. I won't push them too fast. But I refuse to watch the realm tear itself apart with each new succession or each dispute. We have to give them a framework that outlasts our reigns. Otherwise, everything we do is temporary. Jon's expression warmed with quiet admiration, and he nodded. You're thinking long-term. That's good. A knock at the door startled them both. Tyrion peeked his head in. He took in the sight of the 2 Targaryens close together, reading the tension or camaraderie in their posture, but he made no comment on it. Pardon the interruption, Your Grace. We have a visitor. Sir Bronn of the Blackwater arrived, and he's demanding an audience regarding certain land promises that Cersei once made him. Nothing. Daenerys sighed, rubbing her brow. Of course, promises made by the dead. Let him in. I'll hear what he has to say. Tyrion gave a slight bow. He's waiting in the hall. I'll bring him. Jon exchanged a small smirk with Daenerys. Bronn always shows up at the least expected times, he murmured. We'll handle it. They moved to a larger audience room, adjacent to the corridors. This room was smaller than the Great Hall, but more comfortable for private meetings, with a rectangular table and a handful of chairs. Daenerys took a seat at the head of the table, Jon to her right, Tyrion standing by her side. A moment later, Bronn swaggered in, wearing a confident grin that never quite reached his eyes. He gave a mocking half-bow, arms spread wide. Your Grace, it's always a pleasure, he said, though his tone dripped with casual irreverence. His gaze flicked to Jon. And to you, the new prince. My, how things change. Tyrion cleared his throat. Get on with it, Bronn. You said you had business. Nessintoide. Bronn tossed him a smirk, then addressed Daenerys. Right. Business. Seems your late predecessor, Queen Cersei, promised me River Run if I took care of certain obstacles for her. My lord hand here, he gestured flippantly at Tyrion, once promised me High Garden, though we know how that turned out. Now I don't see either lady or lion paying up. So I'm here to bargain with the living. Daenerys kept her expression measured. Your loyalty is questionable, Sir Bronn. You've been on every side of the war at some point, if I'm not mistaken. He shrugged. Loyalty's a tricky thing. But I've got no quarrel with you if I get what's owed. I did more than a few favors for House Lannister, risked my neck fighting the dead and the living. All I ask is a place to rest my boots, a castle of my own, as promised in one form or another. Jon's brows knit, but he let Daenerys speak. She drummed her fingers on the tabletop. I'm aware of your services, and how you once threatened the hand of the Queen to ensure payment. Not exactly the height of loyalty, but you did fight for us at the Battle of the Long Night. Bronn grinned, unrepentant. A man's got to eat, doesn't he? Tyrion sighed. I told you I'd see you repaid if we survived. And here we are, surviving. Perhaps we can find a lordship you can manage without too much trouble. He glanced at Daenerys, silently asking her approval. She mulled it over. Bronn was unscrupulous, but also cunning, and not entirely without merit as a bannerman. Still, handing him River Run or High Garden was out of the question. Those belonged to legitimate lines, or were crucial seats of power. What do you propose? She asked Tyrion. Tyrion tapped his chin. There's a smaller castle in the Reach, quite fertile land around it, but not as grand as High Garden. It was historically sworn to the Tyrells, but the family that held it died out. It's currently vacant except for a few stewards. Might that suit you, Bronn? Bronn's eyes lit with a calculated gleam. I'm listening. Is it profitable? Tyrion rolled his eyes. Ample farmland, a decent location near trade routes. You wouldn't become the richest lord in Westeros, but you wouldn't starve. It's called... Daenerys raised a hand, cutting him off. We'll confirm the name and the details. Consider it your reward for past service, on condition that you swear loyalty to me. If I hear even a whisper of betrayal, Bronn lifted his palms in mock surrender. "Understood, Your Grace." "Loyal, as the day is long." She eyed him. "You'll also be responsible for the small folk on that land. If you mistreat them, we will know." Bronn's grin softened by a fraction, and he gave an almost respectful nod. "I can be a good lord, long as no one crosses me." "Right, well, that suits me fine. I'll wait for details." Tyrion scribbled on a scrap of parchment, then handed it to Bronn. "Speak with me later, and we'll finalize. I'm sure the Queen has more pressing matters." Bronn pocketed the note and tipped an imaginary hat, then pivoted and walked out, boots echoing on the stone floor. Once he was gone, Daenerys exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Jon shook his head in mild disbelief. "Only in Westeros do we make lords out of cutthroats," he muttered. Tyrion snorted. "I seem to recall the Seven Kingdoms have a long history of it. At least this way, we keep him content and out of trouble." Daenerys massaged her temples. "One less nuisance if he stays in the Reach. Far from King's Landing." Tyrion nodded. "Precisely. I'll handle the formalities. You've enough on your plate." She left it at that, trusting Tyrion to manage the details. There was a sense of weary satisfaction that at least one more piece of the puzzle was set in place. Each day, the realm inched toward a kind of stability, though Daenerys knew full well that a dozen new challenges could spring up at any moment. Time slipped by in the swirl of tasks. Letters to sign, repairs to oversee, minor disputes to settle. As evening approached, Daenerys found herself roaming the castle, stopping at a balcony that overlooked the city. The sky flared with a brilliant sunset, molten gold and fiery orange blending into soft lavender edges. She leaned on the balustrade, letting the colors mesmerize her. She felt Jon's presence before she heard his footsteps. He joined her at the railing, the last beams of sunlight dancing in his dark hair. For a moment, neither spoke, simply absorbing the majesty of the view. The city's spires and domes glowed in the dying light. And somewhere in the distance, Drogon's sword, a dark silhouette crossing the horizon. Jon finally broke the silence. "We did well today. The Ironborn, that stable boy, Bronn, the roads. None of it perfect, but each small step keeps the peace." Daenerys nodded, a subtle smile on her lips. "I've learned that ruling is 1,000 small steps. Not nearly as exciting as conquering, but more important for the people who live here." He turned to face her, expression earnest. "When I think of what might have been, if that day had gone differently, I'm glad to see how you've grown into this role." "We all have." She swallowed, meeting his gaze. The old ache surfaced, the memory of betrayal and fear between them, but also the bond they had forged from the moment they agreed to fight the Night King together. She reached out, laying a hand on his forearm. "Thank you for standing by me, even when it was hardest." He gently placed his hand over hers. "You never needed to thank me for that. It's who I am." They lingered, letting the warmth of that contact speak volumes. Outside, the sunset reached its peak, painting the sky in brilliant hues. Below, the city's lanterns began to spark into life. Small flickers of light scattered among the winding streets. Daenerys imagined each lantern as a testament to survival, to hope. A city once cast into chaos, now lighting tiny flames against the coming darkness. In time, they retreated inside, the corridor dimly lit by torches. Tomorrow would bring more tasks, more challenges. But for tonight, Daenerys felt a cautious optimism. She had named Jon her heir, spared the city, and worked relentlessly to unite the realm. The scars of war would never fully vanish, but perhaps they would serve as a reminder to choose mercy whenever possible. She glanced at Jon, who walked quietly beside her. The burdens they carried were immense, but they shared them. With each step, they forged a future that neither had expected, a tapestry woven from the threads of love, grief, ambition, and resolve. In that tapestry, Daenerys hoped, there was room for something resembling peace. A peace that might, at last, take root in the ashes and grow.